Right, doing the reset on the truck again. I thought of a video that you guys might be interested in. Constantly gets a mess back here. Get done with the job and everybody just wants to go home, so stuff just gets shoved back here and you always got to clean it all out. So anyway, let's talk about overspray versus dust. A lot of people, I've talked to people and they don't know the difference, and it's really baffles me because they say, oh, you got overspray on this, and you go, okay, so you wipe your hand over it and it goes away, and that's dust. If it's overspray, you can wipe your hand over it and it's still there. It's like a little tiny dot right there. Lots of little dots like that, and they're stuck to the surface. You can't get them off. That's overspray. That's a real problem. You don't ever want to have overspray on anything around what you do. Dust, however, can be also a problem, but it's more of what you want as a painter. You want to make dust and not overspray. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how, two things, how you can keep from getting overspray and making more dust, and what things create overspray that stays and sticks to something. So that's what the difference is, and let's talk about it. So there's a few different things that create overspray. One of them is the material you use. Two is your technique in spraying, how you're spraying. And three is also using a pole gun creates a lot more overspray, and more potential for that overspray to stick, which is actually overspray. When it doesn't stick, that's dust. One thing you can always check is if your material is too thin. Let's say you added a whole bunch of water to it. A lot of times your overspray is going to stick. It's going to stay wet a little bit longer, and it may stick on something, and then you got an issue. Where if you keep your paint nice and thick, like if you take it straight out of the can, or you add just maybe 10% water to it, and some materials, flat material we're talking about right now, then usually it will stick to being dust and not being overspray. So you constantly should be monitoring whether your overspray is sticking and it's dust or not. If you leave a lot of dust on the job, it's a good idea to blow it all off with an air blower or sweep it up, because if somebody gets that wet, sometimes that'll be just as bad as overspray. So those are all things to monitor when you're spraying. So things that also get more overspray versus dust are primer. So a lot of times if you spray primer tends to stick to things where flat paint won't. Another thing that will create more overspray is enamel. So perfect storm of a lot of things going wrong. Guy using a pole gun, spraying enamel. You know, you're asking for problems a lot of times because you start using a pole, you start getting more fallout. Fallout is either one of two things. Either it is overspray or dust. And that fallout needs to be monitored. So if you're spraying, okay, and you're spraying with anything, any material, you should always check your fallout, see if it's overspray or if it's dust. So primer makes more overspray. Not as you do most of the time. It doesn't turn to dust. It's still overspray. And a lot of times the enamel, especially these alkyd emulsion enamels, have a much higher rate of sticking to something further even away than especially a flat paint. So if you're wondering maybe why I'm getting a lot of overspray, it might be because you're spraying enamel thinned. That's another issue you'll run into. As I've seen guys, they take enamel, which is enamel is anything with a sheen. So velvet sheen, this product is here, that's a really low sheen, and they'll say, oh well, that's the same as flat. But the thing is if you check your overspray or you check your fallout, you're going to find that your fallout is overspray and not dust with these products. With anything enamel, so if it's got any type of sheen, any kind of a semi-gloss, satin, velvet sheen, anything that has a sheen in it is going to have more potential to be overspray. And then when you thin it on top of that, that even makes that even higher amounts of possibility that it's going to be overspray and not dust. So what creates something to be overspray? And why I tell you guys about the pole gun makes more overspray and also makes more dust, both, okay, is when you have a handgun, especially when you have this silver gun, Silver Plus, you notice the paint goes up here and it goes straight up to the front, and then it goes through the tip, and then and when you pull the trigger, it goes directly through the tip. There's not a lot of extra things in this gun. It's very direct. The paint goes straight up here. So what happens that creates overspray and dust is turbulence. So when the paint goes through this line here, it becomes turbulent when it turns a corner. When it goes through this little tip here, it becomes a little bit turbulent. But because this tip is so close to where the spray gun has the little, I don't know what it's called, where the valve is, I guess, on the spray gun, that valve is so close to the tip that the paint doesn't really have a chance to become turbulent. So what happens is, the longer you have a pole, it goes through here, it creates a little bit of turbulence, it goes through that pole, and instead of paint just going straight through it, it becomes turbulent when it goes through. So then when it gets to the tip, it becomes very turbulent, and then your fan pattern is not as even as it is through a spray gun as it is through a pole. I have guys that will fight me on this. They tell me, oh no, the pole is the same fan that comes out of there as it is out of the spray gun. That is absolutely false. That is absolutely false because of turbulence. When the paint goes through there, it becomes turbulent when it goes through here. And especially if you have one of those pole guns that has a swivel on the end, because that swivel has like two different right angle turns that it goes through. And when it goes through that, it goes from a large orifice to a small orifice. All those things create turbulence, and that paint, when it gets through there, is very turbulent. And then when it goes through the fan, you'll notice that when you have a fan like this on a pole gun, you will, when you're spraying, a lot of times it'll become like a banana. When you spray along like this, it's a banana because of that type of because of the turbulence that's going through that thing as it goes through the pole. So your pattern is less even, and it's better if you use a handgun versus a pole for those reasons as well. There's a ton of reasons not to use a pole gun, but guys use them for everything because they think it's easier and faster. For instance, I'll give you an example. When you're using a pole gun, how do you use a cardboard shield? How do you hold a cardboard shield and a pole gun at the same time? It's sort of like put down your ducky before you if you want to play the saxophone, right? You remember that? You can't do both. You can't have a shield in your hand and a pole and be accurate and smooth and even. It just doesn't work. So it eliminates you from being able to use shields. You have to mask everything when you do with stuff with a pole. You have to cover a lot more stuff. You can control it when you use your spray gun. And the reason you can do that is because there's less turbulence when it goes through the tip. So think about that when you're painting. So, and the same thing with enamel paints, when they go through the line, is there's difference in turbulence when it goes through there. And enamel paint's going to go through the line different than a flat paint does. And that's why flat paints make less overspray, partly, than enamel paints. So enamel paints typically will make a lot more overspray than flat. Flat will typically become dust if you have your paint set up right. Now there's other kinds of materials as well. So you can go from an acrylic material to a vinyl acrylic or a vinyl paint. Now, vinyl paints are really good for painting, like in warehouses or in places where you really want to just create dust and no overspray. And they even have products called like dry fall, stuff like that, where they are really good at not making overspray. They make dust, okay? And that's what you want in a lot of places. So monitoring the material you're using to figure out what type of thing you're trying to do is always a good idea. So anyway, I hope that helps you figure this stuff out. I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Please like, share, and subscribe.